Many people wonder how such a marvelous building as this library came to be built in Mount Holly Springs. The apparent incongruity of such an elegant structure in this small and out-of-the-way town is actually a perfect example of a very common occurrence in the last half of the 19th century. Yet within its commonness, it also holds a unique treasure. I hope to explain the general conditions that led to the library being built here, and more specifically, the style of architecture and some of the interior design features, especially the woodwork. Any discussion of the library necessarily starts with Amelia Steele Givin, the founder and underwriter. An heir to the Givin fortune, Amelia had the library built not only as a gift to the townspeople who worked in the family-owned businesses of papermaking and brickmaking, but also as a memorial to, well, herself. By all accounts, a very generous person, Amelia knew her place in society. In the decades after the Civil War, families that had accumulated enormous wealth were coming to terms with their responsibilities and risks of their position. The tremendous disparity between the circumstances and those of the working classes was cause for both concern and alarm. Whether out of fear of an uprising of the lower uneducated classes or a genuine desire to pull the masses out of their ignorance and poverty, a movement was afoot within the privileged class to build public library buildings. Miss Givin had her finger squarely on the pulse of popular art and architecture in choosing the Richardsonian, Romanesque, and Moorish styles. From the very beginning, the building with its woodwork was seen as a unique and important addition to the then resort town of Mount Holly Springs. The public library building itself was just a new idea. Although libraries have been around for millennia, and public libraries since Ben Franklin's time, the placing of collections in publicly owned and operated buildings did not occur until just prior to the Civil War. A handful of public library buildings at war's end had grown close to 500 public library buildings by the end of the 19th century. Sponsored by wealthy benefactors, these buildings became memorials and more often than not were designed as such. One of the most popular architects of this type of building was Boston's Henry Hobson Richardson. Born in Louisiana, Henry Hobson Richardson went to college in Boston till the Civil War broke out. Torn between his family's Southern expectations and his friends' Northern sympathies, Richardson moved to France and studied architecture at the prestigious Academy for Beaux Arts. While in Europe, he traveled extensively through France and Spain. He was particularly fond of the Roman structures found in Moorish-influenced areas of Spain and the amazing aqueducts. On his return to the States, Richardson started designing buildings with Romanesque details. Reminiscent of the monasteries and churches of the ancient Roman territories, these designs lent themselves very naturally to a memorial type of structure. Richardson was soon the most sought-after architect in the United States and was commissioned to build many churches, libraries, and government buildings in the style of what was now called the Richardsonian Romanesque School of Architecture. The confluence of the public library building movement and Richardson's popularity spawned hundreds of Richardsonian Romanesque memorial libraries across the country. Mostly found in the Northeast, these Romanesque fortress-looking buildings can be seen standing guard in little hamlets like Mount Holly Springs, as well as prairie villages in Nebraska, and desert towns in Wyoming. So in 1889, construction started on our local expression of these two nationwide movements. Richardson, prematurely dead of Bright's disease in 1879, still had the most influential voice in library architecture. So Amelia Givin asked Pittsburgh's James T. Steen, a prominent Richardsonian school architect, to design her memorial library. James T. Steen was considered the foremost architect in Western Pennsylvania, designing many buildings in downtown Pittsburgh. Unfortunately, only a few of these have survived the skyscraper modernization of this century. Steen designed our delightful and exquisite library using classic Richardsonian elements. The exterior of the library is faced with brownstone from the Hummelstown Brownstone Company. The quarries in Hummelstown provided a rich, warm, reddish brownstone for important public and private buildings as far south as Kentucky and Missouri, north into New York, west to Ohio, and east into New Jersey. Stonecutters, primarily from Italy and Hungary, worked in the stone-cutting shops there to implement the Romanesque designs so popular at the time. Ashlar masonry, in which the rough-hewn stone is cut into rectangular blocks while the face is left rough, was a Richardson signature style. In addition to the main ashlar building blocks, there are many ornamental or organic carved pieces that show the influence of Frederick Law Olmsted, the famous landscape architect that designed New York City's Central Park. All of the above features of the Amelia Givin Library are characteristic of the Richardsonian Romanesque style. Varying combinations of these elements are found in hundreds of small public library buildings throughout the United States. Number 1, the semicircular apse. An apse is a semicircular or polygonal termination to a wing of a building. In church architecture, the apse is usually where the altar is placed. Number 2, rusticated ashlar masonry. Rusticated stone are left largely unworked to leave a natural rough face exposed. Ashlar simply means that the sides have been cut into a rectangular shape. Number 3, battered walls. The walls slope inward from the base as it moves upwards. Richardson used this technique to make his buildings appear to be a natural outcropping of the bedrock that symbolized the rugged backbone of the New World. Number 4, groups of semicircular arched windows in the main part of building and towers. These windows are reminiscent of the aqueduct architecture the Romans left throughout Europe. Number 5, the Romanesque tower near the entrance arch. Usually round, but often rectangular or square in plan, these towers dominate the front entrance area. Number 6, Romanesque or Syrian entrance arch. A semicircular arch with large, equally sized wedge-shaped blocks called voussoirs. There is no keystone in these arches. Often these arches use alternately light and dark stones. Number 7, ornate carving with a natural theme, usually foliate, like leaves, vines, and flowers. Number 8, banks of tall rectangular windows on the reading room wings. The interior of the Amelia Givin Library is a splendid example of Victorian excess in ornamentation and decoration. It is difficult to pigeonhole the style of interior designs of the 1880s into a single classification. Styles merged and overlapped, and often to our modern eye conflict. But to the Victorian eye, it seems the rule on ornamentation was the more, the better. Queen Anne's style, known for over-the-top ornament, would probably be a good place to start in classifying our library. Orientalism, a mix and match of any design element from the Near and or Far East, especially Egyptian, Turkish, and Moorish styling, was all the rage from the late 1870s through the first decade of the 20th century. Literary magazines and books of this time period highlighted the expanding horizons of the newly industrialized and therefore smaller world that the Victorians lived in. It seems that the strange and foreign cultures of the East provided just the right romantic mix of adventure and the exotic. The great American writer Washington Irving enthralled Victorian America with magical and fantastic stories of the almost unbelievable riches of the Moorish kings in his intense travelogues of the Alhambra. The Moors, a North African tribe that had conquered much of Spain, imported many Islamic builders and artisans and dominated Spanish architecture and arts from the 700s to the 1400s. Confined by Islamic religious principles, Moorish artists became masters of geometric ornamentation, completely covering entire palaces with intricate and complex designs in tile, masonry, and wood. The mathematical art of filling spaces with geometric forms is called tessellation. The wooden screens in our library are the result of the merging of this exotic and romantic Victorian aesthetic with the American Industrial Revolution. Only when machines could be built with the capability of turning out this type of intricate carving would our library screens have been possible. Decorative spiral work in architecture and furniture has been popular from the very earliest times, and ancient artisans created marvelous spiral work in all materials available to them. All of this work could be put into the category of spiral decoration of a cylindrical column, the simplest being what is called rope twist or barley twist. This very common barley twist was so named after a European candy that was made with sugar and barley flavoring. The hot, malleable candy was rolled into a long, slender rod, bent in half and twisted together to make a rope-like stick. It is a relatively simple procedure to carve a barley twist design on a table or chair leg. In 1884, the first of 3 patents was issued to Cleveland, Ohio's Moses Ransom for a lathe feeding mechanism with which he could make spiral-turned moldings and columns. In this endeavor, Ransom was far from being alone. More than 50 patents for spiral-turning machines were granted in the last half of the 19th century. It was his second patent, a design patent, which singled Ransom out of this crowd of ingenious mechanics. In September of 1885, Ransom was granted a patent on interlocking spiral molding as an article of manufacture. Ransom separated the strands of the twist molding, creating a completely new type of molding that is now referred to as open barley twist. These extremely fragile moldings would have been too delicate to be used as a table or chair leg, but Ransom wove them together into a myriad of lattice-like screen designs, creating a completely new category of woodwork and design elements. This new work completely captured the Oriental aesthetic and was appropriately named Moorish fretwork by Ransom. Our little library in Mount Holly Springs has the most extensive and most elaborate installation of Moorish fretwork still in existence. Moses Ransom manufactured long, slender spiral moldings in both a left-handed and right-handed twist. When left-handed moldings are placed perpendicular to right-handed moldings, a lattice is formed. The opposite hand moldings are screwed into place, giving a woven look. So how did this woodwork make its way to the Givin Library? It is quite possible that Amelia saw the work advertised in a popular magazine, such as Harper's, Munsey's, or the Century Illustrated. She could have then instructed the architect to use this for the partitions and door panels. The architect, James T. Steen, could have come upon Ransom's fretwork in a number of ways. Directly across the street from a Pittsburgh bank building that he designed was an interior decorating and wallpaper store that handled Moorish fretwork. Of course, the building and architect trade journals also had ads that Steen could have seen. Steen's grandson remembers the Moorish fretwork in his own grandfather's house. The exact route the screens traveled to our library will probably remain a mystery, but that they are here and marvelous is something to be treasured. Turning our focus to the masonry and tile work in the library, we find 3 fireplaces with elaborate stone and tile work, and the entrance floor mosaics. The main fireplace behind the circulation desk has a magnificent carved stonework mantel. The hearth has inlaid tiles made by Minton Hollins and Company of Stoke upon Trent, England. Quite common, these tiles were used extensively in fireplaces and vestibules. Both of the fireplaces in the reading rooms have hearth tiles made by the Providential Tile Works of Trenton, New Jersey. Isaac Broom, the chief designer for the Providential Tile Works, was a well-known Philadelphia-trained painter and ceramicist. His monogram signature on this tile shows Broom personally made the portrait tiles for these fireplaces. The floral tiles that surround the fireplace opening were also probably Broom's design. Recognized nationally as a brilliant artist, Broom was chosen to decorate areas of the White House with his sculpture and ceramic work. To have autographed tiles by Isaac Broom in our library is another remarkable treasure. The flooring of the main entryway has colorful Romanesque mosaic designs. Instead of actual mosaic work utilizing many small pieces of different color tile, these patterns were impressed in large blanks and then colored to give a mosaic effect. This identical tile was used in Philadelphia's City Hall and may have been imported from Germany. I wanted to talk about the chandeliers in the library. When I became a board member of the library, one of the things that really bothered me was the lights that were here in the library. They were industrial warehouse fluorescent lighting that made the place look like a warehouse or something. So I wanted to replace them with something that would be more fitting to the library. I looked into some period lighting, saw that that was prohibitively expensive. One day I was in Home Depot and I saw these chandeliers and they were on a closeout special. I had to go to 5 different Home Depots to get enough of these chandeliers to put in here. I think they're especially fitting because they have a woven pattern around the side, and they really make the library look very nice. In my research into Moses Ransom's Moorish fretwork, I came across a picture in an 1889 American cabinet maker and upholsterer, which was a trade journal of the time. And there was an ad for this umbrella stand, along with some other work by Moses Ransom's company. And I thought, this is an amazing piece with this hyperbolic ring of Moorish fretwork at the top. And I started looking for umbrella stands, searching for umbrella stands online. It took me 15 years to find this from when I started looking at them. But one day there it was on eBay. I call this my Moorish fretwork Holy Grail because I hadn't seen one for 15 years. The seller was in Washington, D.C., had no idea what it was, thought it was mid 20th century, thought it was done by a Viennese or German manufacturer, even though it has a patent tag on it indicating September 15th, 1885. They wanted an awful lot for it. I offered 2/3 of what they were asking, and they said, fine. So a short drive later down to Washington, D.C., I found my holy grail. The Moorish fretwork is made up of left and right-handed spirals that are interwoven. And if you rack them a little bit, you can make a ring that mathematicians call a hyperboloid. Since I was a mathematician, that's what I call them. Amongst Moses Ransom's patents, he had a patent that was issued on Christmas Day, 1888, for this little pig footstool. Gout was a very common malady of the time, and people needed little footstools just to rest their aching foot, just to raise it a little bit. And that's what this was for. This was a gout stool that was designed to be in the shape of a little pig. And I have found many of these on eBay. This one seems to be in pristine shape, except he was missing eyes when I found him. So I knew from the many that I had found that the eyes were mother of pearl cabochons. I was able to find some mother of pearl cabochons and replace the eyes of this little pig. I've named my little pig Mose in honor of his inventor, Moses Younglove Ransom. When I first walked into the library around 1990, I saw this interwoven spiral pattern, and I asked the librarians, what is this? Who made this? What do you know about this? And the librarian said, the only thing we know for sure is that it is steam bent willow. So I went over and I started looking at the lattice work and quickly determined that it was not steam bent, because if it had been steam bent, the grain of the wood would have bent along with it as it was bent. And the grain just goes straight through. So I knew it wasn't steam bent. And by looking at the wood, I could tell that the wood was white oak. So I told the librarians, it's not steam bent willow, it's machine carved white oak. And they said, well, that was the only thing we knew for sure. So I started coming over to the library, looking at the patterns, studying the patterns, trying to figure out what whoever made this impressive mathematical woodwork, what they were trying to do. And one day I was at one of the doors in the library and we came across a little tiny metal tag that had a patent date of September 15th, 1885. That meant I had to go to the patent office in Virginia to try and find the patent. That's a story in and of itself. But I found Moses Ransom's patent, and then I learned that he was from Cleveland, Ohio, which meant I had to take some trips to Cleveland, try and find out more about this guy who made this incredible woodwork. I then made a machine based on more modern machinery to try and replicate the woodwork. And I was successful in making some, although it is still very difficult and tricky to make these pieces. Once I had made the left and right-handed spirals, I experimented with other patterns of weaves. And I came across a weave pattern that Moses Ransom apparently missed, a hexagonal based weave, which I think he would have loved if he'd seen this. This can be done with all left-handed or all right-handed or a mix. This piece is made with all right-handed spirals. In Ransom's patent of September 15th, 1885, he had two kinds of spiral moldings. He had a smooth, rounded spiral, which is in the library, but he also had another kind that was shaped like an auger drill bit. We don't have any of this kind of work in the library, but I was able to make some of that pattern as well. So that's what this pattern is. In my studies of mathematical lattice work, I came across the work of a sculptor from New York State named Alexandru Usineviciu, a Romanian-born artist. He was making moorish fretwork out of helical wires that he made. It was all, for all intents and purposes, exactly the same kind of weaving as Moses Ransom's work in the library. But because of the thinness of the metal, Alex could make even more fantastic and beautiful designs. So I have a couple examples of his work. Here's Alex's version of the hyperboloid at the top of the umbrella stand that Moses did. This is just copper wire from the hardware store turned into a beautiful piece of mathematical art. Being part of the 21st century, of course, I had to try 3D printing. So I did some 3D printing of the work, and this is a piece of spiral from the library itself that can weave together with a piece of 21st century plastic. Moses Ransom called his work Moorish fretwork, but he also did some designs he called Arabic fretwork. I tried to reproduce some of his Arabic designs before I ever found any of his actual Arabic patterns. So I made this piece, and shortly after I made this piece, I ended up finding some Arabic fretwork pieces from Moses Ransom on eBay. One day, one of the librarians called me up and said somebody had come into the library and said that they had, growing up, a chair that had some of the woodwork that's in the library in the back of the chair. I hadn't come across any of this. I started looking for Victorian furniture with wooden lattice in it and came across some pieces. Most of these pieces were attributed to a well-known German furniture manufacturer named George Hunzinger. I started studying George Hunzinger furniture, found some books about him, realized that George Hunzinger did not make this chair with Moorish fretwork in it. I was able to find a company called the Merklin Brothers, who were 6 French brothers who were very adept at spiral work. And they were in New York City in business from 1879 to 1897. And they specialized in what they called fancy spiral furniture. And they started using Ransom's patented Moorish fretwork in their furniture before the patent was actually issued to Ransom. So Moses Ransom and the Merklin brothers must have been working together as early as 1884. There are many, many beautiful furniture pieces done by the Merklin brothers that have Moses Ransom's patented Moorish fretwork in them.